BibleWorm, BibleWorm, reading the Bible with BibleWorm.
Welcome to BibleWorm, getting to the core of the biblical text. I'm Dr. Robert Williamson, professor of religious studies at Hendrix College and the founding pastor of Mercy Community Church in Little Rock.
And I'm Dr. Amy Robertson, director of lifelong learning at Congregation Or Hadash in Sandy Springs, Georgia. We're here every week to discuss the biblical text, both as biblical scholars and as people of faith, one Jewish and one Christian.
This week we look at the story of Aaron and the golden calf in Exodus 32. We wonder about the unrealistic expectations that the people could wait in the wilderness for 40 days and 40 nights without getting anxious, and struggle with the decisions Aaron makes to keep the people from rebelling. We try to parse the difference between worshiping false gods and worshiping God falsely, and wonder whether there is really a difference. And we wrestle with what it means to worship a God who becomes angry, but who also relents of anger when faced with a human interlocutor who insists on covenantal fidelity. Thanks for joining us. Hey, Amy, how are you this week?
I'm doing pretty well, Bobby. How are you?
I am doing okay.
Have I told you already that we now have foster dogs?
Foster dogs?
I tell you this because there is an adorable small foster dog. If anyone wants this dog, they should contact BibleWorm. Who's like right outside the door where I'm recording. Extremely sad that he can't run around me in circles for the duration of this.
I bet he's sitting out there wondering what has happened to Amy, who has been so long delayed. What should I do? What should I do? I'm going to make some golden kibble for myself.
He's found all my earrings and he's melting them down in the living room.
Yeah.
Oh,
I don't know
Joey,
how to live
don't
that
do it. Don't do it, Joey.
So, Amy, we are in the episode of the golden calf this week in Exodus chapter 32. When last we talked, we were talking about the Passover in preparation for God leading the people out of Egypt across the Red Sea. Mm-hmm. What do we need to know in order to get us caught up to make sense of this story that we're reading today?
Okay, so here's what I would put in our quick catch-up. We have had this dramatic rescue of the people from Egypt, the parting of the sea, the drowning of the Egyptians who were pursuing the people through the sea. So they've arrived in the desert, and then there's Sinai. They've gotten the 10 Commandments, and now Moses has gone up to the mountain alone. The Israelites are around the base of the mountain. And Moses starts getting very lengthy and detailed instructions for building the tabernacle, the Mishkan, that's going to be in their midst, that's going to be the dwelling place of God. So Moses is up there for a long time. The Israelites are waiting. That's sort of the setting. And for anyone who is starting religious school or like runs a religious school, you know already, you can't just leave the people. Like, I picture them like children, sort of. You can't just leave them to wait indefinitely and think some kind of chaos is not going to erupt. But that's what's happened. And the chaos, it will erupt. This will shock nobody at all who listens to this podcast, but I have a lot of empathy for the Israelites in their worry.
I love that about you. You are always empathizing with
the bad guys. No.
Characters in the text that are supposed to be no empathy for. Just the way you set that up is reminding me just a little bit of our podcast that we did a couple of weeks ago on Genesis 2:3, where you were like, the Garden of Eden was never going to work. Like, what were they even thinking? And now you're saying, like, this is never going to work. Like, what are you doing taking Moses away for 40 days? I don't know. I'm just noticing that sort of pattern of, like, we have this sort of tension between God and humanity, but in some ways, like, entirely predictable tension. Mm-hmm. For anyone who has ever
been with humans,
been an educator or a human,
yeah.
So it is interesting, though, that what Moses has been doing this whole time is getting details about proper worship of God, and then whilst he is up there doing that, the people are down at the bottom of the mountain doing improper worship to God. Like, it's just like the text is kind of contrasting these things in an interesting way. All right, we're just going to start with 32:1. Because there's already a lot to unpack just in that one verse, and then hopefully we'll go a little faster.
We're not going to stop after every verse.
One verse at a time. When the people saw that Moses delayed to come down from the mountain, the people gathered around Aaron and said to him, "Come, make gods for us, who shall go before us. As for this Moses, the man who brought us up out of the land of Egypt, we do not know what has become of him." Okay, so the people have I mean, they've asked Aaron to make gods for them. How do we start thinking about that?
I mean, I think the first thing that stands out to me is it's sort of like make a god for us to replace Moses.
Right.
Are they intending to make a god that represents another god?
Right.
Or are they intending to make a different focal point for Adonai, like the God of Israel, because Moses has disappeared?
Yeah.
I don't know.
To me, that's one of the interesting tensions in this text, is one can read this text, and we'll see as we go, but one can read this text as creating a god to worship instead of Adonai, the God of Israel.
Yeah.
And one can read this text as making a representation of the God, Adonai, the God of Israel, because they've lost their representation, which was Moses. And both of these are technically violations of the Ten Commandments,
Yes.
but they're violations in pretty different ways. But I also liked where you started out saying that you have sympathy for the people. And so I'm just like, if you just try to put yourself in the people's mindset, like, okay, in retrospect, we can tell this is a bad idea, but something about it seemed like a good idea to them at the time. Can you kind of try to get in their head in a positive way?
What I want to say is, like, it's a big expectation to think that a people who have been traumatized by being enslaved all their lives and then have had some kind of big, epic, and terrifying experience of being saved from that slavery, but then are deposited into the desert. And so I picture them almost like in my head, like they're baby birds who have imprinted on Moses, you know?
Yeah,
like
I love
Moses
that. Yeah.
is there. That's what they've got. They've got Moses.
Yeah.
And he disappears for a
Yeah.
long time. And so the fact that the people start to think like, well, he's not coming back. We're going to have to figure out something else for ourselves. And we're going to have to take matters into our own hands. I mean, again, I'm not saying this was a good idea.
But you can kind of understand a little bit, at least what was the anxiety that was.
Yeah. I mean, when we were
leading them to
talking
this
about
idea.
Genesis 15, we talked about the anxiety of waiting. Like you're just supposed to, Abraham in Genesis 15 was just supposed to wait on this promise from God. And sitting and waiting in the desert for 40 days is maybe the most anxiety-provoking thing we can imagine.
One of the other things that's interesting to me in this text is there is, like, we're going to see over and over again references to who brought the people out of Egypt. And here we get the first one, which is the people referring to Moses as the man who brought us out of the land of Egypt.
Yeah.
And I was just curious, and maybe we do something with this a little later in the text, but do you attribute any significance to that, Moses, the man who brought us out?
That's so interesting because I noted it later in the text when it comes up, but I did not notice it here. But again, to me, that indicates that like what the people are capable of understanding of this situation, like they need something a little more concrete than this invisible God that they're not supposed to make any kind of representation of. And so they have made that Moses in their head.
That's really interesting to think about. Maybe they already kind of made an image of God before they make an actual image of God.
Right, but it was Moses. Yeah.
Okay, so in verse 2, Aaron said to them, "Take off the gold rings that are on the ears of your wives, your sons, and your daughters, and bring them to me." So all the people took off the gold rings from their ears and brought them to Aaron. He took the gold from them, formed it in a mold, and cast an image of a calf. And they said, "These are your gods, O Israel, who brought you up out of the land of Egypt." When Aaron saw this, he built an altar before it, and Aaron made proclamation and said, "Tomorrow shall be a festival to the Lord." They rose early the next day and offered burnt offerings and brought sacrifices of well-being, and the people sat down to eat and drink and rose up to revel.
Okay, so where do we start here? Well, I mean, I'll just start here. Starting by saying, take off your gold rings and, give me all your gold. Give me all your jewelry.
Yeah.
Makes me think of two things. One is that this is reminiscent of how they get the gold for the tabernacle, right? The tabernacle, which has been commanded by God. They get the precious metals for that through voluntary offerings. They say, let all who are sort of moved to contribute.
Yeah.
Bring your gold.
They're kind of doing something sort of like what they're supposed to be doing. Is that what you're saying? It's just like a...
But it's misguided. Uh-huh.
Right.
Can we talk about the singulars and plurals?
Yes.
So my translation has a singular for the God, because it says they've made one calf.
Yeah.
And yours has a plural. But again, that's pointing to the Elohim, the fact that the word for God is just plural, is always plural.
Yeah, I mean, that's the issue. It's just so in Hebrew, it's Ela Elohecha. So these are your gods, quite literally. But the name of God one of the names of God in the Hebrew Bible, as you well know, is plural. And so it's gonna look like that, sort of regardless. And so one has to make an interpretive decision. The NRSV has made an interpretive decision to translate it plurally all the way through. These are your gods.
Here it doesn't quite make sense to me because they've only made one calf.
Yeah, okay, so we need to talk a little bit about calves and what they represent, right? One way of understanding it is that this calf is itself an object of veneration, right? That the calf is somehow either a representation of a god or is, they're representing like virility or something like that. And so you're actually worshiping the calf itself. The other way of understanding what that calf is that it is the sort of, the animal transportation for a god who is invisible. So one is to sort of envision the god sort of standing on or maybe seated on the calf. And so the calf itself is not a god, but is it's like the Pope Mobile for an ancient Near Eastern god, right? It's like the vehicle that the god rides around on.
I want to press you a little bit on the idea that they might be venerating the golden calf itself, like that is the god. I feel like the golden calf is representative of something, maybe transportation, maybe it's supposed to be an image of what the god looks like. But I don't know, do you think that they might think that golden calf that they've just made is itself?
I think you're picking on me about something that I didn't say, or at least I didn't mean to say.
Fair enough.
Which is, I don't think that they think that like golden calf like is, like, what I mean is they made an idol, like, when the Philistines make an idol of Dagon, right? They don't think that the statue is itself the god.
Yeah.
They think that statue is the representation of the god who is present in some special way in that statue.
Yes.
So what I'm saying is that one can read the golden calf as a representation of a god, or one can read it as the transportation upon which an invisible god is seated.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
And so, I mean, what we're talking about is the commandment that's being violated here the commandment against worshiping other gods besides Adonai, or is the commandment that's being violated here about making graven images which represent the God of Israel?
Yes.
Are they worshiping a false god, or are they worshiping God falsely?
Yes. I think that's a great way of articulating that question. Yeah.
So and in my mind, the translation difference between the NRSV and the NJPS, like when you read the NRSV, "These are your gods, O Israel," it reads like you're worshiping false gods.
Yes.
And I guess I take your point. There's only one calf, so there would have to be like there's a god carpool. They're like all riding on the back of the one calf, which maybe is a little bit unrealistic. I don't know. Versus the JPS, "This is your God." That sounds more like they're worshiping the God of Israel in a unapproved way.
Yeah.
And I think there is actually a tension in this text about which of those is happening.
I think that's right.
Now, Aaron is less ambiguous about what's happening. Like, he is trying to steer this thing back. I think, this is the way I read it anyway, is when Aaron sees the calf, he says, "Oh, yeah, let's make a festival to the Lord." And there he uses the proper name, Adonai, to, Aaron is not being ambiguous about whether these are gods or whether this is God. Aaron is saying, this calf represents Adonai, let's have a festival.
Yeah, I mean, yes, I love the way that you've laid all that out, and I think that, ties in my initial question sort of like what's going on with Aaron here, and there's, a rabbinic tradition that when he says take off your earrings and do all this, that he's kind of stalling for time and hoping that will discourage them. They're going to be like, well, I don't want to give you my earrings.
Yeah, interesting.
That he is trying to discourage them or slow things down as much as he can to try to buy time for Moses to get back down there and figure it out.
Yeah.
I mean,
so the rabbinic tradition is a very sympathetic reading of Aaron kind of doing the best he can.
Yeah, I mean,
look,
there are a lot of rabbinic readings of everything, Jews don't agree on much.
Yeah.
But I mean, Aaron becomes known as a lover of peace. Like, disciples of Aaron love peace and pursue peace. And so having that teaching already sort of aside from, like, that teaching exists apart from this text, and then taking that teaching to this text requires us to look for peaceful motivations that Aaron might have had in thinking, okay, Moses is really good at sort of negotiating things with God. So, like, Moses is going to sort of take the God end that we'll get to in a minute.
Yeah.
And Aaron is better or is good at sort of pacifying the people and trying to come close, like, meet them sort of where they are and try to make good out of it. I mean, I wonder if they had come to Aaron and said this, and Aaron had said, you all have lost your minds. We're not doing that. We're going to wait patiently for Moses. Would the people have waited patiently for Moses, or would they have gone off and done something even more egregious, or chosen another leader for themselves, or done, whatever? And so the Jewish tradition comes down and says, like, maybe this was the best Aaron could do.
He did what he had to do. I really like that reading of Aaron. I mean, because it doesn't really excuse what happens at the end of the day, right? And God is pretty angry about it. But it does kind of explain why Aaron was doing something other than just like, hey, let's, like...
Right. It doesn't make him quite such a, I don't know, like, he's not just totally mowed over. Like, it gives some intention, some positive intention to Aaron.
Yeah. So now God is going to respond in verses 7 through 10. The Lord said to Moses, go down at once. Your people, whom you brought up out of the land of Egypt, have acted perversely. They have been quick to turn aside from the way that I commanded them. They have cast for themselves an image of a calf, and have worshipped it and sacrificed to it, and said, these are your gods, O Israel, who brought you up out of the land of Egypt. The Lord said to Moses, I've seen this people, how stiff-necked they are. Now let me alone, so that my wrath may burn hot against them, and I may consume them, and of you I will make a great nation. One of the things, and I try to emphasize it in the way that I read it, but one of the things that I love is the first thing God says is, this is your people who you brought out of the land of Egypt. Like, God is totally backed off. Like, I don't got nothing to do with these people. I don't know what you're talking about.
You pointed out earlier that the Israelites have named Moses as the one who brought them out of Egypt.
Yeah.
So then again here, having God say, you brought them out of Egypt.
Yeah.
I don't know. I feel like it does start to certainly not blur the line to the point where Moses is like reaching God-like status, but it really elevates Moses as like the embodied representation of God in a way that I really haven't seen in the biblical text before.
Yeah.
Or haven't noticed it.
And I wonder to what extent God is being ironic here. Because, in Exodus 20, God says, I am the Lord who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of slavery. So elsewhere in the biblical text, God has said, I'm the one who did that. And now God has echoed the language of the people.
Maybe God is saying it sarcastically as an echo of the people.
I think one can read it that way for sure. Like, if they're going to say that you did it, then fine.
Right.
You did it. And now I'm going to get rid of them.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Now, in my mind, in verse 8, God is not as ambiguous as we have been about what the golden calf represents. God says they worshipped it and sacrificed to it. God does not say they worshipped me via this unapproved symbol. Mm-hmm. In a sense, we've been talking about the question of, are they worshiping false gods or are they worshiping God falsely?
Yeah.
And in this passage seems to be saying, those aren't different things.
Interesting.
Even if they intended to be worshiping the God of Israel in an unapproved way, God is receiving that as worshiping of another God.
Yeah.
So there is a way that God wants to be worshipped, and that's the way to worship God. That's very interesting.
And
anything else is
to
not.
Think of, I've been reading a lot of Deuteronomy lately, and the way that there's this association between such a close association between God and in Deuteronomy Torah. Like, God and the laws that God gives are so close to each other. You can't separate them. So you can't say, no, I choose God, but I don't choose the laws.
Yeah.
And so that, for me, is an interesting tie into what you're saying, that you can't say, I choose God, but I'm going to worship God in a different way.
Yeah.
There's no space between God and the teachings that God gives.
Now, there's a couple things in what God says in verse 10 to Moses that I'm interested in. The first one is that God says, leave me alone, or
Yeah.
in the NRSV, let me alone,
Yeah.
so that my wrath may burn hot against them and I may consume them.
Yeah.
So first of all, God wants to be angry and destroy the people, which is probably worth a comment. But also, God is asking Moses for a little space. Like, I need a little privacy so I can burn hot and consume the people.
What strikes me is how much, I guess, power Moses seems to have in this text. Like, why does God have to tell Moses, let me be?
Yeah.
Like, God could just go do whatever God wants.
Yeah.
But seems to acknowledge that there should be a conversation here, or God anticipates that there would be a conversation that God would be expected to participate in. And so God's asking for, can we just skip that? I don't want to have that conversation. I want to go do my thing. And God seems to recognize the power of what Moses is likely to say, which indeed does turn out to be powerful.
Yeah. That's so interesting.
So what about God wanting to burn down the people? Do you want to talk about that?
Yeah, I mean, so like this passage and passages like it really, like, they mess with my concept of a God who is like tender and compassionate and loving. Because like this is a God who at the flick of a switch is ready just to be done with the whole thing. And it makes me like reframe lots of things about my sort of soft and gentle God to remember that there is like this ferocious side to God who does not easily abide people worshiping falsely or doing things that are in violation of the covenant. And it makes me uncomfortable, which is exactly what I think that maybe it's supposed to do, is to say once you have tamed God, then you have started to worship a false God. And you must be reminded that God is a power that is not to be trifled with.
Yeah. I mean, I think that as people who tend to mingle in more progressive religious communities, you and I probably get a lot more exposure to the God of mercy than the God of judgment.
Now, the other piece that is interesting to me there is that God has a backup plan, which is, I will make of you, Moses, a great nation. Yeah. So I'm going to get rid of, I made a covenant with Abraham, and so all the people are my people now, but we could just hit the reset button, get rid of all the people. I mean, it's kind of what God did in the flood, right? Get rid of all the people and start over with Noah. Now we're going to get rid of all the Israelites and start over with Moses. Any thoughts about that offer that God has made there?
I mean, it's very interesting, and okay, so it's hard to read it without knowing what comes next from Moses.
Right, yeah.
But it seems like these people have been a pain in the tuchus for Moses. Moses never wanted this job.
Yeah.
Has been trying to do it well. The people are driving him nuts already, and they're 3 months into their 40 years in the desert.
Yeah.
It seems like this could be a pretty sweet deal.
Yeah.
Like, forget those people. We're going to start over with other people.
And if you read this in light of what God has just said, like, leave me alone so that I can do this thing I want to do.
Yeah.
One way of reading it is God has anticipated that Moses is going to object. And so God is trying to sort of sweeten the deal.
Yeah.
Right? Like, leave me alone. If you just let me do this thing, here's this great perk you get out of it, which is you get to be the father of the multitude.
That's right. We'll start over.
So it turns out that if God is trying to anticipate what might motivate Moses to let God do this thing, God has maybe misanticipated.
Yeah.
Because Moses speaks up now in verse 11. Moses implored the Lord his God and said, O Lord, why does your wrath burn hot against your people, whom you brought out of the land of Egypt with great power and with a mighty hand? Why should the Egyptians say, it was with evil intent that he brought them out to kill them in the mountains and to consume them from the face of the earth? Turn from your fierce wrath, change your mind, and do not bring disaster on your people. Remember Abraham, Isaac, and Israel, your servants, how you swore to them by your own self, saying to them, I will multiply your descendants like the stars of heaven, and all this land that I have promised I will give to your descendants, and they shall inherit it forever. And the Lord changed his mind about the disaster that he planned to bring on his people. What do you notice about Moses' approach to God here in trying to get God to change course?
It's so interesting. Like, I really see this as like an activity in psychology or something that,
Yeah.
especially when someone is as impassioned as God is in this moment and you're trying to get them to cool down, you
Yeah.
really have to figure out what's going to matter to them.
Yeah.
Like, what is the thing that's going to slow them down? What's the thing that's going to catch their attention in the face of this, intense emotion that they're feeling? And so what Moses decides on is in two parts. None of it is, this is the wrong thing to do.
Yeah.
But it sort of is like, you've gone through all this trouble already, and you're going to people are going to think people are going to think bad things about you.
Yeah.
Like you brought these people out to be your people, and you're immediately killing them. How's that going to look for you? What are all the other gods going to think of you,
What else do you see going on there?
Well, the appeal to the promise that God made to Abraham, Isaac, and Israel / Jacob. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Almost a reference back to Genesis 15.
Yes.
Right? With the look up at the stars and remember. Yeah.
Yes. And when we talked about that in Genesis 15, we talked a little bit about this concept in the Jewish community as like the merits of the ancestors, that we mess up all the time and God gives us more grace than we have earned because of the merits of our ancestors. And this case this is like the first example, although it's really referring to the covenant as opposed to the merits in particular. But be kinder than you may want to be to this generation because of the relationship that you had with their ancestors.
Now then, the last thing in this text that I think is really interesting is this whole notion that, so in verse 14, the Lord changed his mind. Mm-hmm. How do you think about that theologically in terms of, what does it mean to have a God whose mind is changeable?
I mean, I think, especially at this point in Israel's history, I think of it more as a God who is like fundamentally in relationship with God's people. And there's a back and forth about it. So it is, in the abstract, it is strange to me to think about God changing God's mind. But I feel like this is early enough in the relationship that both Israel and God are sort of figuring out the terms of this. Like, what is this actually going to look like? And God has to lower God's expectations considerably, which is like, this has happened many times already in the biblical text. That God, the bar started out too high. And Israel's going to have to do better. You can't keep making golden calves. We're not going to do that. But I guess I see it as primarily relational, as opposed to like God off by God's self has changed God's mind.
I love the way that you have said that. Christianity, and I don't know if this is true in Judaism or not, you can fill me in, struggles between what I would describe as the biblical portrayal of God and the philosophical portrayal of God that comes sort of out of Greek philosophy, in which God's immutability or unchangeability is kind of a key attribute. Mm-hmm. And here it's the case that God is not immutable. God is not unchangeable. God set out a course of action, and a human being talked God into doing something else, and God changed the divine mind. And I like what you're saying about that in terms of the covenanted relationship with God, that it is hard to imagine how an immutable being can be in any kind of a meaningful relationship, where God is just going to do what God does. Like, why are we even here? Like, it becomes this sort of like, there's still a point in worshiping, I guess, so that God is positively disposed toward you. But in terms of engaging with God in meaningful ways, that sort of disappears if you have the sense that God would never change.
But it's interesting for me to think in terms of the immutability of God, if we sort of zoom out, right, and look sort of at the larger narrative and not focus in on this story.
Yeah.
Moses, in some ways, is helping God to stick with the immutability. Like, God said God was going to keep this covenant. And now we're seeing like how the sausage is made. But at the end of the story, God has stuck with God's original intention or plan.
I love that reading of it. Yeah.
I don't know what that means for immutability, but
it's a nice way of thinking about what Moses has done here, which I had never really thought of, that God had made this plan in Genesis 12 that God was about to change.
Yeah.
And Moses has talked God into fulfilling the promises that God made. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love that. All right, Amy, so this brings us to the part of our podcast where we think about how this text might connect with our own communities today.
Yes.
What connections are you making?
I'm pulled in two different directions, but I'm just going to pick one. Just pick a direction. And it is a similar direction to what I said after our conversation about the creation story, about the serpent and the apple and Adam and Eve.
Mm-hmm.
The Israelites just got these rules. Like, they just got them. And they immediately mess them up, And it sort of is like, the way that I'm experiencing it is we rip off the Band-Aid fast. Like, there are going to be mistakes.
Yeah.
And we might as well get through that now so we don't have the illusion that we're going to be able to perfectly keep the covenant that God has given us, because it's a hard covenant.
Yeah.
And it's reminding me of the Jewish holiday of Rosh Hashanah and the idea of Teshuvah, which is sort of, I don't know, repenting or turning back to the right path. And this Jewish teaching that there's no one and done with Teshuvah. Like, you're never going to arrive and then be like, okay, we finally got it and it's smooth sailing from here. Like, there's no smooth sailing. There's going to be a constant straying from the path and coming back to the path. And having these stories up front as soon as these big covenants are made or these big, like, important instructions are given, for me, it's realistic and, I don't know, somewhat freeing. Because the reality is, if you zoom out of this story, okay, this was a bad moment. This was a bad episode. But if you zoom out of this story, before this story, they're getting all these very detailed and repetitive commandments about building the tabernacle. And then there's this story, and then it just picks back up again with the building of the tabernacle. Like, there's there's an eternity about this relationship that is much bigger than these ups and downs. And the ups and downs will happen, but they don't need, we needn't think that they're going to destabilize our relationship with God, even though they feel really destabilizing in the moment.
No, I love that, because oftentimes, I feel like we think if you mess it up, like, it is messed up for good.
Right. It's been sullied somehow. Yeah.
Or have some sense that it would be possible that we would not mess it up, which time and again proves to be unreasonable.
Right.
And so to think, like, this is the dynamic of our relationship.
Yeah.
I like that a lot.
Yeah.
I'm really taken with what you were saying earlier about the sort of inseparability of worshiping God and worshiping God in the ways which God has asked to be worshipped, which both has a ritual component to it, but also an ethical component to it. In the beginning of the podcast, we were trying to wrestle with, well, what do the people think they're doing? Do they think that they're worshiping God incorrectly, or do we think that they are worshiping other gods? And then God is like, those two things are the same thing to me.
Yeah.
And I'm really struck by that there are temptations, I think, to do things maybe in good faith, or like at least try, like, well-meaning things
faith,
that we do. Less bad faith. Yeah. Where we are legitimately trying to worship God or honor God in ways that God does not actually recognize as being worshipped or honored. And so to be a little cautious about shaping, what they have done quite literally in this text is tried to shape God in their own image. They have tried to make God into a bull, which they can then say, no, this is our representation of God here. And I think we try to do that in our own kinds of ways. We create images of God that we can look at and say, like, yep, this God looks an awful lot like my ideology or my political agenda or my whatever's going to preserve my comfort. And God is not those things. One of the reasons I think God resists the image is because God transcends all kind of easily accessible, easily digestible concepts about what God is. I'm really taken with that idea. The other thing that's going on in this text that is fascinating to me, which I don't entirely know what to do with, is something about leadership.
Yes. That was the other thing that I was thinking. Should I talk about that instead? Tell me about leadership. Yeah. Well,
so I'm curious what you think about it. And I think since we both thought of it, probably it's something that's in this text that has some urgency to it.
Yeah.
Because I'm thinking about, all the way through, like, this text is, like, the reason that people are anxious is because they need someone to lead them in a way that no one is leading them at the beginning of the text.
Yeah.
They have been left alone to their own devices, and they have gotten nervous after 40 days. And so to think of Moses' kind of absentee leadership there, think of God kind of unreasonably maybe thinking that people can handle 40 days, to think of Aaron I really like your interpretation of Aaron as he is doing the best he can with what he's got.
Yeah.
The people are going to kind of lose their way if he doesn't do something, and so he tries to take what they're offering him and shape it back toward proper worship of God. God wants to destroy everybody. Like, God has this moment where God's leadership style is like, heck with it all.
Yeah.
And Moses then has to step in. So there's this interesting kind of, I mean, in some ways a critique of leadership just in general. I think that nobody's really quite figured it out. And everybody in this text sort of messes up their leadership role, including God, in one way or another. And I don't know exactly what the positive message is in there, but the sort of critique of leadership and a little bit of relieving of the burden that if even God gets irritated to the point of
that's true,
just wanting to be done with it, then like we can go a little easy on ourselves too.
Yeah.
What were you going to do with that? I'm just curious what your thought on leadership was.
I was thinking in particular of Aaron and really wondering, like, did Aaron do the right thing? I mean, it turned out okay in the end, I guess, but it was pretty ugly. Like, what were the other options on the table for Aaron? Like, I imagine some other leaders in faith communities, like, we want to please people and we want to care for people. And so when people tell us they feel that they need something, it's hard to know when to meet them where they are, even when we think that that's not right. Like, how far are we willing to flex? You know, how far are we willing to go to meet people and try to bring them along the path? And at what point is it sort of, no, we can't do that.
Yeah.
And if some of you are going to leave this community because we can't do that, then so be it.
Yeah.
And I don't have an answer to that question. I mean, I think that is part of the question of leadership in religious community is what are the red lines? You know, like what are the things that we won't go there, and what are the things that we're willing to say, like, well, this is taking a bus in the right direction-ish. Like, you know, there are only a couple options on the table, and what's the less bad option? And
especially in this moment, I mean, we always come back to pandemic, but that is the world in which we live. Like, in this moment where people have been kind of waiting for more now than 40 days. I mean, we're 6 months in now, and it's not clear when things are going to sort of come back to normal. And so trying to figure out, how do we continue on worshiping God, living lives as communities of faith in ways that God approves, while also trying to innovate new things?
Yeah.
How do we do that? And it's kind of a fraught process, and I think this text recognizes that for us.
Yeah.
All right, Amy, I really have enjoyed this conversation, and as usual, I'm thinking different things about this text than I did when we started, and I always appreciate that.
Me too.
Next week, we're going to move on to 1 Samuel chapters 1 and 2. I'm going to be in the story of Hannah and her husband Elkanah.
Fantastic.
So I will look forward to that conversation.
I'll be here.
All right. See you then.
Take care.
Bye. Thanks for joining us for this episode of BibleWorm. If you'd like to hear the rest of our conversation about this text, join our Patreon at the extended worm level or higher to get access to extended episodes. You'll also find other goodies like early access, video lectures, weekly liturgies, and more, starting at just $4 per month. Visit patreon.com/BibleWorm podcast for details.
BibleWorm is produced by Bobby Williamson and edited by Joel and Laura Becker. Our theme song is sung by Colin Bagby. We're grateful to all our supporters for helping us to keep the podcast going. A special thank you to our executive producer, Fox Valley Presbyterian Church in Geneva, Illinois, and to our newest supporters, Jennifer Jamez, Carol George, Janet Beck, and Rebecca Longino.
Join us next week when we'll be discussing the story of Hannah and Elkanah in 1 Samuel 1 and 2. Until then, keep on digging.